Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Connect 5 presentation, Collections Diversity Working Group, Decolonizing the Collections Policy and Next Steps. I'm Jennifer Easter, and with me today is Joanna Blair and Stephanie Power, and we are liaison librarians at Centennial College. So here's where we're going to take you today in our presentation. We will start at the beginning. We'll talk about how our working group started. Then we'll talk about current initiatives we're working on, some upcoming initiatives we're considering, and then finally, we'll end with your diverse collections working group, suggestions for your own diverse collections working groups. So how did it all start? For us, it started as a discussion at our librarians meetings last fall. So within our librarians meetings, we discussed two things. We were reviewing our collections policy, and in our draft collections policy, there is reference to diverse authors and publishers and making sure we collect them. In addition, at this same meeting, we underwent a group exercise discussing a paper entitled Creating a Social Justice Mindset, Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice in the Collections Directorate of the MIT Libraries. And for this exercise, we all read the paper and brought to the meeting some ideas from the paper that we thought we could implement at our library. And several of us brought forward the idea of creating a diverse collections committee to highlight what's in our collection and also to look at increasing our diverse collections. So the three of us volunteered to start this committee, and we began these meetings in spring of 2022. And the work of our committee is, of course, aligning with the work of our college. So currently there are draft recommendations for our anti-Black racism task force that's been formed at Centennial College. And one of the recommendations has to do with the library, creating a diverse collection of resources by Black authors. And our work also aligns with our Indigenous strategic framework that also encourages the collecting of resources for our Indigenous community.
So one of the first things we did was develop a terms of reference for the group. We wanted to improve the capacity of the librarian group to increase content of diverse authors and publishers, and to improve the promotion of these library holdings. The group is going to look for new ways to engage with equity-seeking groups in the selection process. And we also want to report back to and involve the librarians team. The other thing we did is we put a time frame of 1 year on the working group with the hope that the practices that we develop will become part of the regular workflow.
So once we had established our terms of reference for this group, our next stage was to move on to a literature review. So to make this easier for ourselves and to share what we had learned, we created a shared Zotero library so we could read what each other were reading, and we could explore what our colleagues across libraries, archives, and museums were doing with regards to decolonization and indigenizing their collections. So as we started adding readings to this list and sharing amongst ourselves, we noticed several recurring themes that kept coming up again and again. So the first one that was really big was that to have your collection be truly diverse and represent your population, you need to collaborate with that population. So collaborating with library patrons, especially folks from marginalized or underrepresented identities, was a big theme across lots of our readings. Several also highlighted making the physical space in the library more welcoming to patrons to make them feel like the space is theirs and give them a sense of autonomy over the collections. It also helps them access things more easily since folks may have different levels of comfort with navigating library resources and databases. So another big thing that came up was partnering with on-campus groups or departments to see what goals they're working towards with regards to decolonization in their own departments, and how we could leverage those partnerships to make changes in our own department. And lastly, there were a few articles, especially some of these really helpful ones, that said, when you're doing a collections policy or you're doing some work, you need to explicitly acknowledge these problems that you were talking about. So you don't want to use weak language. If you're talking about decolonization or colonization, say decolonization. If you're talking about racism, talk about racism. So we need to name these issues before we can start to overcome them.
We also gathered some information about our students. We looked at internal college data that our college collects on domestic and international students. Among the data they collect are categories related to international enrollment by country and ethnic background.
So in terms of initiatives at Centennial, we wanted to start by looking at where we are. And certainly in terms of our current collection, we have a lot of materials that would fall under the category of diverse, but we wanted to look for ways of making that material more visible to students. So one of the things we realized is that our collections actually have a lot of non-English material. And it's not that we are specifically collecting non-English material, but our ebook collections and our packages of databases include a lot of non-English material that we could make more visible to our international students, certainly, through the use of a LibGuide and some tutorials teaching how to filter for non-English material, and then specifically highlighting those collections that are strong for non-English material. One of the interesting things that came out of this reflection for me was just the awareness that specifically collecting only in English is in and of itself perpetuating a colonial and Eurocentric collection.
So in addition to looking at what we were already holding in our collections, something else that we started to examine was the existing supports that we already had built in terms of including our diverse population at Centennial College. So we had already developed some great partnerships with our colleagues at the Center for Global Citizenship, Education, and Inclusion, the Place for All Reconciliation for All Our Relations, which is our Indigenous Studies and Indigenous Knowledges department, and with SAGE International Education, who works with international students. So speaking of students, we also partnered with a few different student groups over the years, most recently with the Queering Community Social Club, which is our local LGBT Two-Spirit Plus club, and the Muslim Students Association. So we worked closely with these groups, mainly doing things like library guides and film screenings, and looking at resources that they found interesting, that they found reflected their lived experience. And when we didn't have those resources available, we had the funds to be able to purchase them specifically for these students from certain fund codes that we had. So in addition to examining our existing partnerships across campus, we also took a closer look at our existing collections policy. Our literature review was really helpful with this regard in helping us to get a deeper understanding of where libraries are coming from and helping us to recognize the colonial roots of Western libraries. We are also lucky enough to get some feedback from CLO's Indigenous Matters Committee as we began the process of revising our collections policy. So another takeaway from some of the reading and reflection that we were doing was the need to incorporate language around student well-being into our collection schools, ensuring that underrepresented groups felt a sense of ownership over the collection and that it was there to support them both in their academic and personal growth was something that we felt was important as we move forward with our collection development. Finally, we wanted to make sure that we were addressing reconciliation in a meaningful way. So lots of academic circles, we hear the term reconciliation, but we also hear that we need to move towards reconciliation, and we need to incorporate concrete steps for decolonizing and indigenizing our collections. So a few of the things that we have been doing over at Centennial is adding hereditary names to our records. We have been going in and removing problematic subject headings from our records as well. We are starting to collect more types of content, such as audio content, as these are more in line with Indigenous ways of knowing, kind of representative of oral storytelling. We're also working towards a community consultation process and a suggestions for purchase form to help us hear directly from the voices of our students, staff, and faculty in what ways the library collections can support them.
So let's talk about some upcoming initiatives. Where are we going? One of the things we're considering is coding library purchases. And this was inspired by one of our readings. So we are investigating the use of diversity codes to code our purchases in ProQuest Oasis when we are selecting titles for purchase. And what we would do is we would create a list of diversity codes and select them from a drop-down menu when we are adding our purchases to Oasis. Something we've learned about this process is we are unable to select multiple codes for books by authors who have intersectional identities. So we will need to spend some time thinking about the codes we want to use. So ultimately at this point, we're currently deciding if we want to proceed, and if so, what kind of coding structure we would use. And we think this will be really beneficial because this will give us an idea of not only how many books we're purchasing, seeing if we can increase that number, but also taking a look at perhaps the total number of books as a percentage of our whole collection spending.
Another initiative that we're trialing is building a knowledge base of publishers and leaders in the field of diversity publishing linked to our collections area. So I have a LibGuide that I'm building related to my collection area in engineering, technology, and applied sciences, where I'm listing the goals I have for decolonizing my collection. I'm collecting lists of books and awards that I can follow from year to year and look for titles. Leaders that I am following on Twitter and societies that I can refer to. And again, look for titles and ideas and new knowledge in this area. I've also listed publishers and subject headings that I can search in Oasis for new titles. And because this is a LibGuide, I'm hoping that other collectors will add their own resources, and we can learn from each other and share ideas. But again, because it's a LibGuide, we can also make this public facing and show our community what we are doing to meet our goals. So diversity collections is another initiative that came out of our readings that we're hoping to pursue. And this is a collection that is focused on diversity and is collected in partnership with stakeholders, specifically equity-seeking groups. And think of a leisure collection that you feature prominently. It will be similar. It's a visible collection at each campus. It can include both fiction and nonfiction titles. But what you are hoping to do with these collections, and we are hoping to do with these collections, is engage your community and ask for suggested titles. And the result is hopefully that as people come into the library, they will see titles that represent them, that they feel represented and their voices are heard within the collection. And again, this goes back to the visibility that we've already talked about, in that we already have budget lines for anti-Black racism and Indigenous titles. So making those more visible is a win for everyone.
So we wanted to finish with a summary and some advice for those of you who are considering creating a diverse collections committee at your own institutions. So we would suggest seek volunteers for your committee rather than assigning members, so that the members are invested in the work that's being done. Consider what you are already doing or how you could use what you already have. For example, there might be many ebooks in other languages that you could promote to students. Learn who your students are, the languages they speak, what they would like to see in their library collections. Consider the priorities of your college. What are other departments at the college doing that you could be a part of? What campus teams could you team up with that have similar priorities to the priorities of this working group? And finally, what are others doing? We learned a lot from reading the literature, and that's always a good place to look. And speaking of literature, we wanted to finish off with a list of resources that we looked at that were helpful for developing some ideas that you heard about today that we're developing here at Centennial. And finally, we would like to say thank you for watching this video, and we would be happy to answer any questions that you have in the Q&A.